Well, welcome everyone. Vayeshev, Parshat Vayeshev this week. Every week we've been looking at another uh, important moment. Rather than go through the text sequentially, which we've done in a previous iteration of this class, I'm taking selected topics of each Parsha and trying to make them as accessible as possible for this format, which is obviously so much different from being together. Um, so we the last several weeks we've looked at the stories of Jacob, um, and the dream, and the last week was the encounter. Um, this week we have a very powerful moment. This is the story of Joseph, and I'm going to do the beginning of the story of Joseph. Notwithstanding this parsha, the story goes on for another 4 weeks. So we'll take selected items of each of these next 4 weeks, um, and look at these powerful moments. Uh, I'm selecting the moment at the beginning of the parsha where we get compressed into maybe couple of dozen verses. Um, the whole story of the sibling rivalry, it obviously goes back before these events, and then the loss of Joseph, and the perceived loss of Joseph, and then my theme here is going to be the refusal of Jacob to be comforted. This, I think, is a very powerful, profound moment. And I want to ask, why is it that he refuses to be comforted? We won't get into it in a second. We'll try and let the text take us there and give you some examples of this. So, and I don't want to give you say it's a trigger warning, but obviously it deals with the sensitive areas of loss. And loss is something that we are all familiar with in each of our lives, through the loss of loved ones, under obviously very difficult and different circumstances. Every single one is different and unique, um, but obviously there are commonalities that we can learn from loss, and um, and there are certain sequences within loss and what we're going to call loosely, in quotes, recovery, um, that ought to be common. And then, of course, there are sequences when you don't recover, and that is certainly, uh, in the realm of human experience. And Yaakov, is an example, at least as far as the Torah is really presenting to us, an example of not dealing well with this. He doesn't recover well, and we shall focus on that in a second. Okay, so here I'm going to go and read. We'll start with the story, and here we go. So I hope everybody sees it. I'm going to read the English, and I'll pick up the some key Hebrew phrases as well. I'll make it a little larger for people. Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. And Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he had made him an ornamented tunic. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him, so that they could not speak a friendly word to him. Once, Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright. Then your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. He dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and his brothers, His father berated him. What, he said to him, is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground? So his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind. One time when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, I will send you to them. He answered, I am ready, hineni. And he said to him, go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, what are you looking for? He answered, I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing? The man said, they have gone from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph followed his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say a savage beast devoured him. We shall see what comes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he tried to save him from them. He said, let us not take his life. And Reuben went on, shed no blood, cast him into that pit out in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourselves, intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he was wearing, and took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to a meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilad, their camels bearing gum, balm, and ladanum to be taken to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let us not do away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed. When Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph up out of the pit. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who brought Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he rent his clothes. Returning to his brothers, he said, the boy is gone. Now what am I to do? And they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a kid, and dipped the tunic in blood. They had the ornamented tunic taken to their father, and they said, we found this. Please examine it. Is it your son's tunic or not? He recognized it and said, my son's tunic. A savage beast devoured him. Joseph was torn by a beast. Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and observed mourning for his son many days. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, no, I will go down mourning to my son in Sheol. Thus his father bewailed him. The Midianites, meanwhile, sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, courtier of Pharaoh, and his chief steward. Okay, that's like the postscript of the story. And so he was brought down to Egypt and they sold him. So it takes us a while to kind of get back into this story. And I have to admit, as with almost every biblical story, I think we could do an entire class on almost every verse in this story, because it's just so rich and profound, and there's so much going on in there. Just a couple of notes that just as a kind of warm up. You see the focus on clothing and tearing and recognition, and these are motifs that are woven through the stories of Joseph. They'll be woven through other stories as well. The idea of recognizing the piece of cloth, okay? And I think another key element here is going to be stealth, lying, honesty, lack thereof, cheating, betrayal, the preference of one child over another, and these kinds of themes that make this such a rich story and such a difficult story altogether. But my focus I want is the last several lines. Okay, so this is the focus. Vayishalchu et ketonet hapasim. And we'll talk about this word Vayishalchu in a second. But whenever I teach this story, I'm often amazed by this based on the interpretation that we normally give to the word Vayishalach, which is that the brothers are just so cowardly. They can't do it themselves. They can't present the tunic themselves, notwithstanding the fact that it says Vayaviu alavihem. So we get the sense that they send it before. I always say they FedEx it, to Jacob before, and they do it with a message. So they say they had the ornamented tunic taken to their father. Vayaviu alavihem. They brought it to their father. Vayomru. They said, Zot matzanu. We found this. We found Zot matzanu. This we found. Right? Zot matzanu. This we found. Hakerna. Do you recognize it? Haktonet bincha hi imlo. It is your son's tunic or not. Okay? So it's hard not to read that verse without the machetes, scalpels, and daggers that are located within it, and the jealousy, the contempt, the anger, the rage of the brothers when they make mention of the ketonet, because the ketonet is the gift that Jacob gives to Joseph, and you almost know, like you're reading the Antov Chekhov story, right? The detail at the beginning is going to be significant at the end, right? That's how we've always been taught to study these stories, that no detail is left unutilized. The ketonet functions as the symbol of the love, the preferential love that Jacob has for Joseph. And so to the brothers, the ketonet simply is the symbol of contempt. And in saying Zot matzanu, this is what we found, they are, the Bible is compressing layers of meaning onto this text, which is, the facts are that we are doing this, that we are bringing this garment to you, and underneath the fact is A, our own conspiracy, B, our own resentment and contempt for you as our father for having selected our brother as your preferential child. So recognize this. It's not without this anger and contempt. Haketonet bincha, your son, not haketonet achinu, the tunic of our brother. He imlo, is it or not? And so Jacob says, Vayikira, he recognizes it. Vayomer, he says, Ketonet bini, it is mine, my son's tunic. Chaya ra'a achalatu. From here, the recognition of the blood on the tunic, he makes this conclusion that it's a wild animal that has eaten him. Tarof Toraf Yosef. He is certainly torn by a beast, and you can imagine that horrible sense that he is seeing the torn up garment, and he's making this conclusion based on this, and he's also interacting with the rest of his sons. And for your Hebrew ear, you can almost identify the similarity in the words Vayakira and Vayikra. Vayakira, he recognized. Vayikra, he tears. Vayikra Yaakov Simlotav, and again, the garment fabric motif, to tear your garments to this day is the symbol of grief. Vayasem sak b'madnav, he put sackcloth on his loins, another garment, the the impoverished garment of mourning. Vayitabel al bano yamim rabim. He mourns for his son many, many days. And the words yamim rabim echo in our ears because for Yaakov, yamim rabim achadim, yamim achadim, there are two instances previously in his life where this or similar phrases are used. One, when Yaakov is sent by his mother to Haran, she says, "You'll stay there for a few days, right? And then I'll come get you," right? Which she never does. And then when Rachel appears, he works for Rachel 7 years, and the years were to him like 7 days. Okay, so this is the Bible's beautiful way of really kind of stitching all these narratives together. It's just, this is why we enjoy this and we delight in the study so much, is because it touches us on so many different levels. And now Shiva. Okay, I'm sorry to even make this kind of frame around it, but I'm saying this to an entire group here with whom I think every single one of us, we've all done this, been there, done that. We've all sat Shiva. We've all certainly comforted, and it's part of the regular life of a community. And I know, of course, that for many of us, it's still obviously very fresh. But it's part of life, and we accept that it's that this is a reality of life. So we have a kind of Shiva scene here. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him. You get the impression that he's sitting on a chair and they're coming to give him Shiva, right? They're coming to comfort him. And these two words are the chill. They chill. He refuses to be comforted. He does not accept their comfort. And so he says, I think, some of the bitterest lines of the entire Torah. And I'm going to go down to Sheol in mourning. I'm going to go to my own grave as a mourner, right? And I mean, this is, you can see the tear in his heart, the grief. These are words of grief that almost have no parallel within entire scripture. Ered el beni avel she'ola. I will go down mourning to my son. I will meet him in Sheol. Vayefk oto aviv, and thus his father bewailed him. And it's kind of unclear who the father is here. The Midrashim have a beautiful take on this. Yitzchak is still alive. The grandfather is still alive here, because Yitzchak is 180 years old when he dies, and this is I forgot to look at the math here, but it's before Isaac's own death. So their Midrash says that it's actually Isaac who's crying here for Joseph as well. And the beautiful Midrash here, which I might refer to later, is they have a scene. The rabbis say when he goes to visit, and comfort his son, he cries with him. When he leaves, he washes his face and he cleans himself up, because Isaac has the gift of prophecy and he knows the whole story. And is asked, like, why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you tell him he's still alive? And Isaac says, and again, this is a midrash that's worth a whole class. Isaac says, look, God didn't want to tell him, so why should I? which is just awful. It's awful, but it's precious. Okay. All right. And the verse 36 is a postscript. It's a kind of PS. The Midianites took him down and sold him to Potiphar, and that's a setup for the next story. Okay. So we have this terrible, painful scene. I call it the Shiva scene only to help us kind of frame it. It's obviously in a tent, and the people don't know what to do with him. His sons and daughters. Again, where does he get daughters? The rabbis go crazy with these with these interpretations. I wouldn't say go crazy. They're highly imaginative. There's a debate which is worth studying as well. A debate that says that in fact each son was born with a twin daughter. Okay, and that the family is quite large, and there's another rabbi that says no, don't be silly. It's basically they are daughters-in-law at this point, and by this point, the boys, the 12 sons, they're really, the 12 sons, or minus Joseph, and really minus Benjamin, because Benjamin's still a young son, have married Canaanite women. And you recall, we discussed this a few weeks ago, the prohibition against marrying Canaanites is lifted now with this generation for a very good reason. The sons of Jacob constitute a unit that you marry into and that they don't marry out of. And we saw in last week's Parsha when they fought with the locals after the rape of Dinah, how much they don't want to have anything to do with the Canaanites in terms of making one group together. What they want is they want to be a separate group, and if you want to marry, you have to marry into them. I use the example of the Kennedys or the Bushes or the whatever. You marry into the family doesn't marry out, and that's what's going on there. And so you have this refusal to face the pain or the comfort. He refuses to accept their comfort. I'm going to stop here and see if you have any comments on anything or questions. Go, Ilana.
I have a question, and maybe the commentary has answers about that. Why did Jacob send Joseph to see how the brothers were? He knew that the relationship with the brothers and Joseph was not so good. And why was he worried about them? Did he think that maybe they will get friendly with each other if he went to look for them? What was the purpose?
I think that's really one of the great questions of the text, because it's and we'll talk about it in the next half of this, which is what was he thinking? What didn't he have enough insight into his children that they weren't getting along? And so yes, the commentaries deal with some of this, but we don't need the commentaries here. We have our own reaction to this, which is a possible interpretation, which is that he may not be aware of the enmity because he's so blind by his own narcissism. I'm saying this, to be critical of our patriarch. We're allowed, okay? He is there. This is a terribly flawed person. He should have known. He should have known already after 3 generations where there's been preferential treatment of one child over another. He should have known that it doesn't end well. And so it's, you could say that he is trying to enable the sons to manage their own affairs and to get along well. And this is, Joseph is 17 years old at this point. It's perfect to the establishment of autonomy and independence. I mean, in fact, in terms of developmental psychology, it might even be a little late. It might even be a couple of years late in terms of adolescent development, when you want the adolescent to differentiate from the parent, or from the differentiate, yes, and to show some independence. That typically happens around 13 to 17. I'm not, familiar, and I know Maurice comes on sometimes here. I would ask him, it's Eric Erickson's Childhood and Development. What stage does a child get identity? And the answer is, it's not an accident that Jews have chosen 13 to have bar mitzvahs, precisely at 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy, that the issues of identity begin to get formed. Joseph, you have to recall, is a bit cloistered. He's lost his mother, so he's unusual from 10 of his siblings, 11 if you count Dina, that he's lost his mother. Um, so he is coddled a little more than the others. And so the typical interpretation that I would give here is that in the coddling, Jacob realizes that he's got to let him out sometime. And every parent recognizes, unless you are so needy as a parent, where you don't recognize, where your own needs, your own personal needs as a parent for the total adulation and attention of your children overrules or subordinates the kid's need for independence. That's not a healthy situation. So I would say on the one hand, he's a little late to the game in allowing Joseph his independence. On the other hand, he's also trying to say, well, the brothers are going to be the nation. They got to get together and they got to do it somehow. And now, Joseph, you're on your own. And if you just recall the scene, he's wandering. He really doesn't know how to be on his own. He really doesn't know what he's looking for. He doesn't have much of a relationship with the brothers altogether. And of course, with the dreams, he's annoyed them and antagonized them altogether, and they hate his guts, and he knows that they hate his guts. Go ahead, Bob.
Two questions. Could you say some more about what is intended with going down to mourning in Sheol? And also the whole question of his not wanting to be comforted. Does that suggest that there may be different ways that are acceptable or not acceptable being comforted?
So let me get to Sheol. Sheol, this is, they're hovering underneath this text is an idea that, that's possibly where you end up after your death. You end up in a nether world. We typically don't spend a lot of time dealing with these ideas, but you'll find in the Torah, especially and throughout the Bible, there are vestiges of ideas that kind of get, they kind of pop up, and that you get the sense that the Torah is trying to smack them down. Last week, for example, in the fight with the angel, the idea that's popping up is that God is appearing by himself, and that the fight is a physical. And the Torah is trying to smack that down because it's against the idea of God being having a body. Here, the idea of hell, it's there. We have references to this in many of the Psalms, and it's part. It's like when Jews today say bashert, or we have all sorts of different kinds of ideas that are part of a mythology that are not necessarily there's no real authorized version of Jewish belief, obviously, but they're part of the luggage, shall we say. It's part of the luggage. In terms of not accepting, why doesn't he accept it? This is really an important question, and we're going to focus on that shortly. Okay. Any other comments? Go ahead, Susie.
There's some foreshadowing here in
Yes.
the Hakarna. That's what Tamar says to Yehuda.
Absolutely. The text it links this story. The Torah links this story to the next story, or it's going to be in another chapter, where Joseph has separated from his brothers and has a whole episode with Tamar, and Tamar is the daughter. We can't encapsulate the story properly in a minute or two. The point is that she's his daughter-in-law. He has 3 children, 3 sons. Through the course of the history, the story of their marriages, one son dies, Er dies, the son Onan dies, and finally there's a little son, Shelah, and since the law of levirate marriage means that Shelah has to marry the widowed woman, Jacob is responsible for having Shelah marry the widow, Tamar. But Jacob says, I lost 2 sons already. I'm not going to give him my third. And Tamar rightfully feels that she has been dissed by Jacob. She disguises herself as a prostitute. She takes payment for him, or a pledge. The pledge is the sign. She gets pregnant. They want to punish her, and she says, "Well, it's the person who owns this, the cord, achotemet aptilim, the seal, the staff, and the cords. If you can recognize this, hakerna, then you will know who the father of these of the child is, or that she happens to be carrying twins." So
And then he takes
recognition.
responsibility.
I'm sorry.
And then he takes responsibility.
And he takes responsibility, and that is, in a way, what differentiates Judah from everyone. Judah takes it, and also, look, Judah is another character in the Torah and in the Bible that loses a child. I want to give you an example of just the probably the most famous example of the loss of a loss. In this chart here, not a chart. It's just I tried to segment out the different responses that Jacob has. I'm going to just gloss over that quickly. He sees, he tears, he puts on his sackcloth, he mourns, he refuses. Okay, this is one of the other major moments of a loss, and just for the sake of contrast, you can get the sense that it's trying to comment on something. Here, this is the child of Bathsheba and David's union, okay? And you recall that this is prior to the birth of Solomon. You recall that David had this event with Bathsheba, and she's pregnant, and she ends up giving birth. And the child is born sickly and not able to thrive. So this is a terrible, terrible trauma for David. And during the course of the days before the child's death, he's praying and he's fasting and he's gashing, he's doing all the things that you would expect him to do, totally beside himself. And then the child dies, and it's such a great scene. David's servants are just whispering around with him, right? They don't know. They're afraid to tell him. They're afraid to tell him that the child is dead. When David saw his servants talking in whispers, David understood that the child was dead. David asked his servants, "Is the child dead?" "Yes," they replied. Thereupon David rose from the ground. He bathed and anointed himself. He changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and prostrated himself. Then he went home and asked for food, which they set before him, and he ate. His courtiers asked him, "Why have you acted in this manner? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child is dead, you rise and take food." He replied, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows? The Lord may have pity on me. The child may live. But now the child is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back? I shall go to him, but he will never come back to me." David consoled his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and lay with her. She bore a son. She named him Solomon. The Lord favored him. I have to say, it's one of the most moving, complicated, cathartic, emotional moments in the entire Bible. And on the one hand, you as the reader, you're not permitted to have contempt for David because of what he's done. You instead emerge with a kind of respect for him, because he basically says, "Look, I did what I could do. There's nothing I can do now. And so in this case, I have to move on." And he takes responsibility for his actions. He pays a huge punishment, a huge price for what he did. And this moment, in a sense, because he accepts it, he is in a position to comfort Bathsheba, the mother of the infant, who is not as responsible, although she was a partner here. It was he has, he's liable here. had he not decided that while she was bathing on the roof, this wouldn't have happened. But she, you are led to believe, reading closely, she goes along with the story here, and of course she emerges as the powerful force within the royal household. But I show not to go into that whole story altogether, in analysis, but as a way of saying that the dealing with loss. I mean, he gets up, he takes a shower, anoints himself, puts on his clothes, goes to eat. He's not the same, for sure he's not the same, but he basically has accepted it. He accepts it. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I'm going to do to bring this child back. I have to move on. I have to move on. I think the pain lingers with him. The Torah, the text never lets us believe that he forgets. And of course, that is just the reality of loss. You never forget. However, he does move on. Okay. And so, shall we? Here we go. So now, I want to just give you a little bit more of texture here from. I've been reading the commentary of Vayeshev Jacob. All right, and he adds a few pieces of insight that I think will be novel for us. And he's saying basically that what comes around goes around. What goes around comes around. Jacob gets his just reward for being such a cheat, and the presence of clothing in these stories, especially bloody clothing, makes the point that much stronger. Here he writes, whatever the case, his son's cruel trickery represents one more measure for measure punishment for Jacob's having procured his brother's blessing. He cheated his father by using his brother's garments. Now, his own sons cheat him by using the garment of their brother. Moreover, we have already noted that Esav's fine clothes, his bigdei chamudot, were really bigdei chamutzot. And here, I'll point this out in a second, sour-smelling clothes stained with the blood of the animals Esav hunted. With this meaning, the correspondence between the transgression and his punishment is tightened even further. Jacob tricked his father with foul-smelling, blood-stained garments, just as he is now deceived with a garment dripped in blood. This is Jakovich. He makes a comment here that I haven't seen anywhere else, but he says as follows: the word chamudot, chet mem dalid, as the shoresh, as the root, is similar to chamutzot, which is vinegary, salty, foul. Okay, and he says the dalid and the tzadi sometimes get replace one another in the text, and he said it's possible that the original story was bigdei chamutzot, and he cites another text in another part of the Bible where the word bigdei chamutzot or chamutz, is with a reference to clothing. What he's saying here, it makes perfect sense, which is, why would he take his Esav's A clothes to wear before Jacob? In fact, it never made sense to me, reading the story. He's coming from the field. Why is he putting on a good suit? Bigdei chamudot. He has to put on his ratty outdoor clothes, and the outdoor clothes are filled with blood. They're smelly. They're foul, right? And so he deceives his father, Jacob, deceives Isaac with the foul, bloody clothing of his brother. Joseph's brothers deceive their father with the foul, bloody clothing of Joseph. That's what he's saying here. I think that's a very interesting take here. The one who falsely played the role of the hunter now believes falsely that his son has been hunted. Jacob grieves for his son. Confronted with Joseph's garment, he tears his own. Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned his son many days. On sending Jacob to Haran, Jacob's mother had expected wrongly that their separation would last only a few days. Jacob, who wrongly assumes that his son has died, now grieves inconsolably for many days. One more example of the biblical writer's sense of the literary justice. We who know how Jacob has been fooled respond otherwise, like Jacob, who after Joseph's dream kept the matter in mind. So we know the story. That's the beautiful literary depth of the story. Joseph's brothers watched their father's torment, having no choice but to continue the masquerade. All his sons and daughters sought to console him. Though Jacob is not comforted, but he refused to be comforted, saying, "No, I will go down to my son mourning to Sheol." And his father bewailed. Jacob mourning indeed lasts many days, as many years. So, and here's, this is not Rembrandt, but this is called, it's anonymous, in the circle of Rembrandt. And you can see a nice painting here. And there are more details that I can't really decode here. But the coat, this is the coat. And this is Jacob, the inconsolable Jacob. And the dogs here, which have certain representations, okay? I have to show you this because this is such a powerful moment, and yet in the play, it goes like this. I'm gonna just advance it a little bit. You're probably gonna. Jacob.
True, but feel no sorrow, do not grieve, they would not want you to. You see, there's one more angel in heaven, there's one more star in the sky. Joseph will never forget you. It's tough, but we're gonna get by.
Okay, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. I don't have time to do that. It is a lot of fun. And the reason why I put it there is because, one way of dealing with grief is not to deal with it. It's to deal with it, it's just, I don't want to say it, obviously they're poking fun. The whole play is to poke fun and a little bit of serious. Whenever we go to see the play, it's just the experience of the music. It's just about fun, and there's certain laughter, and there's always a little bit of satire going on there. The point is that when things are so painful, sometimes one of the outlets for that is humor. and what's interesting here, I don't want to analyze it to death, but that song, "One More Angel in Heaven, One More Star Above," it's a kind of poke in the eye to the cliches that people use when we comfort people who have suffered terrible loss, right? And I say this as someone, who is the comforter in chief sometimes, and someone who has been comforted, that the last thing that people really appreciate is the cliches. Although I think people do appreciate comfort, but well, there's one more angel in heaven, one more star, the things that he lived for, truth and light never die. That's the silliness of the Joseph. He's they're playing with this idea that you can comfort someone with these cliches, which is obviously ridiculous. And in this version of the play, you don't see the torment in Jacob, that they can't deal with it, and that tells you that this is American, because the American culture can't deal with this as like the Europeans can. Okay, not going to go
Rabbi?
there. Yeah, go ahead, Marlene.
Isn't there also a measure of guilt that he feels because he saw the way his mother treated him, and
Yeah.
he now knowingly sets his son up by giving him the kutonet, by
So-
giving him something different than the others.
Guilt.
He's playing out that same.
Yeah, it is in the mix here. Hold on to that. All right, I just want to. I was looking for a source that was similar to the source that we are familiar with, when about accepting grief, and it's big Hebrew here. I'll give you the translation in a second, but when you ask forgiveness to someone, when you say you're sorry, okay, the person who receives the apology has an obligation to accept it. And in the way we teach that those rules, particularly around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you get 3 chances basically, and if the person doesn't forgive you on the 3rd, then you've fulfilled your obligations. The person who has an obligation to forgive. In other words, if I say I'm sorry to you, you have an obligation to forgive me, provided that my apology to you is sincere and it comes with a kind of promise that an understanding that I'll never do what I did again, right? And so you have an obligation to accept the apology. That's what it's in. And this particular source says that you have an obligation to accept comfort. You cannot be non-accepting. You don't see that a lot. I mean, this is a rare source. It's in the name of Hagarach Mibrisk, which is Hagaon Rabbi Chaim Mibrisk. That's Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He is writing a michtav al Ptirat Hagaon Agadol Rabbi Zicharia Stern, Zichron Tzadik Livracha. So he was writing a letter to someone else about the passing of Rabbi Zechariah Stern. He died in 1903. He says, Yovo divrei tanchumim kasher kein hu. Let the words of comfort come. Kein hu mitzvah lekabel tanchumim, because you must accept comfort. Umashma shemitzuveh ala evel lekabel tanchumim. The mourner is required mitzvah ala evel, I guess. The evel it's incumbent on the mourner to accept tanchumim. In other words, and he doesn't go as far as I would go here, which is, in other words, Jacob is wrong. He's wrong not to accept the tanchumim, the comfort of his children. Okay, and this is from a responsa of Moshe Sternbach. I'm not going to go. There's another moment in the Talmud where a rabbi doesn't accept comfort. This is the story of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. I'm not going to go into it. Reish Lakish was a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan insulted him. Reish Lakish became sick emotionally from the insult and became deathly ill, and in the end died. And Rabbi Yochanan, who felt guilty, would not accept the comfort. So Eleazar ben Pedah went and sat to comfort Rabbi Yochanan with regard to every matter. Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedah would say to him, there is a ruling which taught in a Baraita that supports your opinion. Meaning, he says, they would study together and Rabbi Yochanan would say something and Rabbi Elazar was a yes man. Yes, oh, the tradition agrees with you. Yes, the tradition. And Rabbi Yochanan got angry and said, are you comparable to Reish Lakish? In my discussions with Reish Lakish, when I would state a matter, he would ask me 24 questions in an attempt to disprove my claim. He would challenge me, and I would answer him with 24 answers. And yet you say to me, I get support, you're supporting my opinion. Do I not know what I say is good? So he's basically not accepting the comfort. Rabbi Yochanan went around rending his clothing, weeping and saying, where are you, where are you, where are you? He screamed until he went insane. And Marlene, Bob, everybody, what you see there is just guilt. It's pure guilt. He is responsible. And so I'm gonna go, we have a few comments here that tell us why it is that Jacob wasn't covered. One that says he doesn't believe it. He thinks he's still alive. In other words, the tragedy is, and this is especially true for the report of a death, right? Where you don't see the body. So you have the phantom idea that he's still alive. So he can't accept it. That's Rashi. Sforno, he says, Sforno talks about the guilt. He vowed to remain in mourning for the balance of his life. His reason was that he blamed himself for what had happened because he had sent his beloved son on such a dangerous errand. Mipnei shitkala al yado sheshalach et Yosef achav. And Chizkuni says as follows: he refused to accept having felt guilty. All right. So I poured it down to 5 things here. He doesn't want to believe Joseph is dead. He wants to mourn constantly, which is an indulgence. He blames himself. And I'm adding number 4 here. I didn't find a source for this. I looked very, very hard, but I'm putting it on the table, folks. This is, I don't know if it's passive aggression or aggression. I mean, this is an action that is to cause pain to the other children, right? The refusal to accept their kindness, their comfort, is an aggression against the other children. Now, in that aggression may be 2 things. 1, a recognition that they were malevolent, and 2, maybe a sublimated sense of his own guilt, right? You are usually aggressive when you feel guilty about something, all right? And maybe there's a lot of rage here. I'm quoting Edith Eger. She has recently, she's a Holocaust survivor. She's become a best-selling memoirist author. She's a psychologist. It's a fascinating memoir and a fascinating book. And she has managed to translate her Holocaust experience into the therapy that she gave over the course of her career. She's like 92 years old now and still gets called to speak to large audiences of people who suffer PTSD. And she talks about the PTSD, or she talks about the trauma, both of her loss of her parents in the Holocaust and the trauma of being a survivor. It's a very, very moving memoir, and I certainly recommend it. It's called, the memoir is called The Choice, but this quote is from The Gift. The memoir is The Choice. Edith Eger, you look her up on Amazon, and it's a quick read. I actually listened to it on audiobooks. So she says, when we have unresolved grief, we often live with overwhelming rage. So she says, in another place, she says, all therapy is really about grief. It's grief work. When you don't resolve it, you're going to live with a lot of anger. And then here is an interesting piece from the book. Grief is often not about what happened. It's about what didn't happen. Her daughter, Marianne, when Marianne went to her first high school prom in a gorgeous orange silk dress, Bela, her husband, her father, told her, have fun, honey. When your mother was your age, she was in Auschwitz and her parents were dead. Okay, imagine you say this to your child.
A good time.
Your child goes to the prom and the father is saying, when your mother was your age, she was in Auschwitz and her parents are dead. So she writes, and she says, I was speechless with fury. My children knew by then that I was a survivor, but how dare he burden our precious daughter with my past? How dare he ruin her night with something that had nothing to do with her? It was completely unfair, totally inappropriate. But I was also so upset because he was right. I never got to put on an orange silk dress and go to a dance. Hitler interrupted my life and the millions of others. I'm a prisoner and a victim when I minimize or deny my pain. And I'm a prisoner and a victim when I hold on to regret. Regret is the wish to change the past. It's what we experience when we can't acknowledge that we're powerless, that something already happened, that we can't change a single thing. Grief has so many layers and flavors: sorrow, fear, relief, survivor's guilt, existential questioning, diminished safety, fragility. Our whole sense of the world is interrupted and rearranged. The attitude, time heals all wounds, but I disagree. Time doesn't heal. It's what you do at the time. I think we can all write these paragraphs ourselves. Okay, honestly, she hasn't said anything new here. What she's done is framed it for us in a way that I think is very accessible and powerful, in the sense that grief is all about regret. Okay, and you can't change anything, and it's not. You have to be able to acknowledge it in order to move on with your life. Ilana, go ahead.
I never understood exactly when we come to comfort somebody somebody in the family died, and we say the very well-known, המקום ינחם אתכם עם שאר אבלי ציון וירושלים. How does this connect? Why did they choose this verse to say to somebody who is who is mourning?
I think it's a very, very good question, and you know that Sephardim have a different way of expressing the Sephardim say Min Hashamayim Tinechamu, right? May you be comforted from heaven. You know, we use that phrase Makom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar V'lei Tzion Yerushalayim, to may God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, to put the grief in the context of the larger grief that is experienced by the Jewish people. In other words,
Like צרת רבים חצי נחמה.
well, I think so. How would you translate that? The anguish of the many is half of comfort. I think, you know, this example here, which is, when I was your age, I was in Auschwitz, or when she was in your age, she was in Auschwitz. You know, that's, I mean, it's an extreme. It's a caricature. I mean, she's reacting to it almost as a grotesque statement, but she's also saying, look, it's true. It's true. But I have to be able to deal with that. And so, look, the archetype of all Jewish grief is the loss of the temple and the exile. Now, you and I may argue against that because we're saying, look, there are competing griefs in Jewish history. And I can recall very vividly hearing Yehuda Bauer, one of the eminent historians of the Holocaust, saying, not without any bombast and without any exaggeration, the Holocaust, the destruction of European Jewry, makes the destruction of the temple look like a cakewalk, or look like a summer outing. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, he didn't say it that way. He said there's just no comparison, and he's absolutely right. There's no comparison in terms of scale, dimensions of human suffering, and everything that you want, and the universal and particular ramifications of the experience. There's, we're 70, 80 years removed from it, and we are in no way able to comprehend its lasting impact. It's 2,000 years since the destruction of the Second Temple. We've managed to package it nicely as a statement. So can you imagine if Jews 2,000 years from now saying "Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch sha'ar v'lei Auschwitz"? I don't think that's what's going to be said. I think what's going to be, you hear me say this differently. I'm very, when I say "Hamakom yenachem," I do a little sleight of hand. I say it in Hebrew, "Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch sha'ar v'lei Tzion Yerushalayim." May God comfort you among the mourners of the house of Israel. In other words, I put mourning into the collective experience of the house of Israel, because at any given time, somebody in the house of Israel is a mourner, and at any given time, the entire house of Israel will never cease mourning from the loss of the Shoah. I just think that's a reality that we live with. Okay, I don't see any other hands, but
Yeah.
there could be other. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a bunch of scattered thoughts that maybe you can pull together, but it builds on sort of the future in terms of what's lost. And what's going through my mind are several things. One is that maybe Jacob's not being willing to be consoled is because he realized that the brothers didn't know what the loss of Joseph might mean in terms of the future, because of his ability to go out and engage the rest of the world. I remember reading someplace that the garment itself, the clothes, are passed down allegedly from Adam and Eve through Noah, through Nimrod, to Esau, to then Jacob and all that. And that there's a difference between it being multicolored versus monochromatic lives of the tribes not wanting to interface with the world. So to what degree is it not only the personal loss of Joseph, but the mourning, if you will, of what may or may not come to be because of his potential death, and maybe his not believing that it really could happen?
Well, I think I would pick up on the point that there is mourning of what will not come into being. You know, one of the themes that I've been dealing with over the last, the last several weeks is that the project that has been given to Abraham is the project of building a nation. And that project requires some facts. It requires people, children. Abraham was not successful at having more than one child who would carry on. Isaac was not successful in having a significant number of children to carry on and to build the nation. Here's Jacob, who was successful in producing the critical number of children in order to be the kernel of the nation, the critical mass of the nation. And one of these children is now gone. I've been trying to find the source for this over the last several weeks, and I have not been successful. But it has to do with the number 12. 12 is the magic number for the tribes. There's a Greek word for it, it's called an amphictyoni, which is the collection of tribes that form a basic nation. I don't want to be too homiletical here, but it's not an accident that the original colonies of the United States added up to 12, maybe 13. Okay, and that it grew from there. All right, and that the colonies perhaps saw themselves as being symbolically related to the tribes of Israel. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that biblical imagery, shaped their imagination, but in antiquity and certainly in the Bible, nations are formed through with 12 tribes, 12 children. You see that with Nahor, you see that with Esav, you see that with Ishmael. They all have 12. Here's Jacob, he has 12. And you get the sense that as this chapter begins, he is like, yeah, we're almost there. We're almost there. We're almost there. We're almost going to have a nation. And then, oh my God, this terrible, terrible tragedy, a calamity. One of the children is dead. He has 11. He has a daughter, but the daughter is raped, and there are 11 boys left. So he is going to be basically an amputee as a nation. And this is, to your point, Bob, this is about the future and not about the present. He is mourning what will be.
On the number 12, this morning, perchance, I was listening to a Kabbalistic rabbi from Israel talking about the 12s in different parts and tying this to, I guess, the Sefirot and the fact that Joseph is the connection, if you will, between Abraham and Isaac and all that in terms of Chesed and Gevurah and Tiferes. And so by losing this, do you then lose the connection between the higher? So it was a fascinating thing about people's attributes emotionally and tying in exactly to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously the Kabbalah uses a whole different system of interpretation here and sees these symbols so differently. There is so much here on many levels, many significant levels. Marlene.
How come he never asked what happened to his son? He just made the assumption that since the cloak was there, the kid was not.
Well, I think that's a really great question in the sense that no, I'm saying what I mean is we all want to write the script here. We all want to write the script the way we would have wanted to do it. We would have wanted because we have the knowledge of what happens. We know the spoiler. We know the ending. Okay, and that's the dramatic irony of the Bible. As we are given the story as it is related to us in as it's unfolding. Okay.
And the
in the moment
is very succinct. It's question and answer, but that question never comes up.
But the reality,
but the other way, why didn't Joseph let him know that he's alive? Jacob thought that he was dead, so there was nothing to do. But Was he doing it in spite? Joseph, why didn't he let his father know?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting here is that most of us will never have this kind of experience. You know, I'm on the other end of these phone calls more than most. Okay, where I'll get the phone call 5, 6 in the morning, whatever, and sometimes earlier, and it's so and so passed away, and so it's shock. You'll have shock. Okay, but the first question, Marlene, is what happened? What happened? So usually you're informed, the person who's calling you says, this is what happened, right? So you have a whole story, and you need to you have a moment where you need to assimilate all of the facts that you can assimilate in order to make something coherent, because this is a shocking disruption to the normal course of your life. Now, what happens here is that they don't tell him. They don't tell him your son is dead. They show him the coat and they go, Zot matzanu, we found this. Isn't this your son's ketonet? And that is just the ultimate in cruelty. It's because they're saying they're trying to get themselves off the hook by not lying to him. And we know the whole thing is a lie. They think that they're not lying to him because they're saying, well, he'll make his own conclusion. Imagine. You know, I've said
Maybe they
before,
want to punish him.
what's that?
Maybe the brothers want to punish
Of
their
course
father.
they do. Of course they want to punish him. Look how much grief they've given them. You know, they're it's just cruelty. And so what they're doing basically is as follows. Again, I read this not to interpret it, but to kind of try and understand, if I were making a film, how would I direct the scene? Or if I were putting it on the stage, how would I direct the scene? So the question I would have as a theater director is, between the presentation of the tunic and the next statement from the brothers, how much time do you let elapse? Okay. And I'll tell you why. Okay. When they say, here it is. So you just watch the pause there. Here it is. And he looks at it. And so if you're the director, you say, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything, brothers. Okay. Let that tension linger. Let that tension linger. Let that tension. And Jacob has to be the one that breaks the tension of the silence, because you cannot endure that tension. Next time you have a conversation that is of a serious nature, listen to the tension in the pauses between questions and answers. Okay, we cannot exist with that much tension and stress, and so Jacob can't exist with that. If they're giving it to him, and the scene is playing itself out as they're giving it to him, and they've told themselves already before, don't say a word. Don't say a word. Shut your mouths. Zip it up. Don't say a word. Give it to him. Let him come to his own conclusions. And that's exactly what he does. And he goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And he looks at them, and they're being button lipped, right? And he's looking at them, and they look at him, and they look at him, and he doesn't know what to say. And so he says, oh my God, Yosef, it must have been a wild animal, because that's what you conclude if you live in the ancient world and you see your bloody tunics. Isn't it amazing?
Didn't he think that maybe they did something?
Maybe who did?
No, never occurred to him that they had a part in this whole happening.
Do you think that they communicated that? Say it again.
Maybe he thought they caused it, but he wanted. I don't know.
So I think that's part of it. I think that his anger, his inconsolable grief, is directed towards himself, the rage and the guilt, and it's also directed against his sons. And you know, this is the story is going to play itself out now over the next 3 weeks, and we would want to pay attention to how these emotions get resolved, because they do in the end. You know, I'm not, you know, spoiling anything for you. They all get together at the end, and Jacob does, you know, have his moment of accomplishment. You know, he is a tremendously depressive character by the end of his life,
All
and
the way through.
all the way through. Yeah, we get the sense that he you know, he's just not able to accept anything in his life. On the other hand, you know, do you blame him? Do you blame him? This is a tall order to accept that your children are that cruel that they would kill each other. That's hard. I don't think you ever, how can you recover from that? You don't. How can you accept that? And how could you as a parent not take some responsibility for that? You know, go ahead. You have to turn on your mute, off your mute. Go ahead.
But Yaakov knew that his brother was about to kill him when he ran away. So he understands that tension of one sibling wanting to kill another.
Right.
He should know.
He should know, and therefore his own guilt is that much
Exactly.
more compounded.
Exactly, because he was faced with that same situation.
Right.
So he could certainly imagine that his children could do this.
We are not nominating him for Father of the Year.
Well, I was going to say,
Or Brother of the Year.
aren't you proud of aren't you part of your ancestry? We have such a good family. We come from such a good family.
One of the things that is so rich about our tradition and our history is the fact that we have all of these characters who are not 100% great. And I think that that's what we have to learn from, that everybody has a little good and a little evil, and we have to kind of pick and choose and try to learn from it and try to do the right thing, because he's a perfect example of what we shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely. Look, if the goal of the covenant is to build a moral people, then you read these stories and you go like, well, you know, look where we start. Look how much work we'd have to do. If that's what the covenant is about, then sure. And look at the tremendous disappointment. I keep going back to Abraham, because Abraham is the one, you know, God says, look what we got. We got a beautiful soul. Well, we'll put him through a few ringers. We'll test him a little bit, but we'll see what he can produce. And with the idea that it's through the family that you inculcate moral, you know, teaching. You know, you don't do it in the school. You don't do it, you know,
No.
today. You don't teach morality on television or through media. You teach it in the family, or maybe in the community. But certainly for the Bible, it's about transmission in the family. And then look what happens. It's every generation fails. At least that's what Genesis is working out. Genesis is about failure after failure after failure. By the time you get to Exodus and the experience of such intense suffering, servitude, slavery, people coalesce around the idea of freedom. And I think that this is the Bible's message. The Bible's message is that you establish a moral order that has to begin with human freedom. Right, and that experience of release from bondage enables you to establish that moral order. Go ahead, Ilana. Or sorry.
With Abraham, he waited 100 years to finally have this one son, the only one. Well, Ishmael, but and then he had to have this experience with almost like losing this son.
Yeah.
So every generation there is like a father son.
No question.
Very complicated.
Last
The
word.
other thing didn't mean to have that, but the other thing that goes through my mind is, how does each of the persons involved in this find a blessing, even when these terrible things happen, either for Jacob or for each of the brothers? How did they each grow? What did they learn from each of these things? Which is something that often comes out in grief work later on, but not in the acute phases of grief, but often later.
Right. So we would like to think that they learned something, and certainly by the end of the book of Genesis, the brothers come together. It takes leadership of Joseph to help them come together. You get the sense that they have learned that they have to be brothers and they have to be together. You know, and I'm saying that that's a romantic picture of it because we all want that. We all, you know, this is like Rodney King. Can't we all get along? It's a romantic vision of togetherness. Look, I mean, to use this as a kind of a sermonic moment, which is, you know, we're living in a moment of tremendous fractiousness in the country, and you know, the romantic ideal is that we all want that everybody should get along. On the other hand, what everyone getting along means is that we have to subscribe to, I guess, a coherent vision, and we all have to agree, but we're not. So getting along means that we all have to get along with differences. That's probably more to the reality, which is we have to accept that we all think differently, we all live differently, and that we have to at the very least respect each other. You know, the brothers have to find a way to establish a political union together, and that, of course, based on a mutual respect. That's what Breshit is working itself out for. At any rate, why don't we leave it there? Again, this has been a wonderful, wonderful session, and join us next week. And
you,
listen to
Rabbi.
Parsha Talk, everything Parsha Sheets.